Hey everyone, welcome to our first little vignette. So hopefully you've had a chance to watch the introductory video. If not, I would encourage you to go back and watch that. Maybe like the last minute to minute and a half of it, you'll see this slide there, and the instructions will be provided for you on how to use it. Very simple, but I recorded that video just so that way you would have that instructional block there, and we could just move forward without explaining it every single video. So I'm sure by the time that you will have watched this block will have already passed and we will have taught it on Sunday, but I'm still going to record it. That way we can have it together just as a way of me being able to refer back to it, and you won't be at a loss for what I'm talking about. And you can go back and listen to it just in case you need any additional information regarding that. So though the Gospel Project writers entitle every one of these lessons, I changed the title for every one of them depending on what I'm trying to bring out for your sake and, of course, for my Sunday school class when we finally discuss it together. So the image-bearing man becomes the first high priest. The only way for me to say this is to just simply say it. Moses is not concerning himself with educating anybody who hears what he has to say, will read it in the future, and so on, with the mechanics of how God created. It's not a scientific record by no means. It's not structured as such. It is a poetical structuring of how God created. That doesn't undermine any argument from either a young earth or old earth creationist perspective. Those kinds of constructs are overlays onto the passage that suit whatever agenda a person might be attempting to try to accomplish in using that as a basis for arguing their point. Moses is concerned about one thing: the fact that God brought order to the chaotic water that account starts with in Genesis chapter 1, verses 1 and 2. And then through that, at the end of the chapter, we have a mountain with a garden temple on the top of it. And those are the things I want to bring out to you here so that when we go into chapter 2, since we're skipping chapter, you can appreciate that Moses is building something here that will make much more sense later on when we develop this thought deeper into the Torah. If you're thinking mountain, where is mountain in Genesis 1? I would encourage you to go and also read Ezekiel 28, this oracle of woe that God is pronouncing through the prophet on this being known as the king of Tyre. This being is said to have been in the garden of God on the mountain of God. The garden of God is clearly Eden, and it must have been on a mountain. So the Garden of Eden in Genesis 1 and 2 must have been on a mountain. So therefore, we have a mountain with a garden temple on the top of it. Now, temple may not make a lot of sense to us as we're just reading that account, but I think Moses structured the account, as many other scholars and commentators also now are picking up on. In fact, I have given you some of those resources in the very last little slide panel there, especially Israel and Adam. I would encourage you to go and read that. In the first couple of chapters, all of this information will be given to you very neat and concisely. It's a very reader-friendly commentary, so I placed that for you there so that way you can follow on behind me there, read for your additional instruction. So I think Moses is structuring the account the way he is so that when we get much deeper into the Torah, we will begin to see and understand very clearly that the words that link the passages together are meant to help us understand what Adam's original commission was in the garden. So I'm not going to read every single one of these, but what I do want to help try to illustrate for you to make sense of this all is that in Genesis 2, we have a slightly different angled view of creation. And with that, we clearly see God is adding even more order to what he's created. Day 5, he's brought vegetation over all of the dry land that he pulled up from the water. And then now he's done that, he has allowed the vegetation to grow, but he is going to order a specific place on top of the mountain that he has brought up from the depths to put these two image bearers that he carved out from the dust within. Adam is made outside of the garden and intentionally put in the garden with a clear commission in mind, and that is to work and watch over the garden. Well, when we get to the problem presented to us in Exodus chapter 40, it's a unique one such that Moses now is going to take the time to develop the thought of what's going on here in Genesis 2 with the first man becoming the first high priest. This problem is that God had told Israel to construct a tabernacle. This tabernacle is going to be a portable, holy mountain. There are many verses of scripture to pull together to help make this make sense, but it's important for us to recognize the place where this was constructed at Sinai. Notice that in the actual tabernacle, God has already told Moses to tell the people who can go where, right? There are zones of restriction. The high priest only in the most holy place. The other priests might have the chance to go inside the holy place where the lampstand and the bread of the presence are, and to offer up incense. And then in the widely open and empty courtyard, priests and Levites, and then the rest of Israel outside of the linen curtained, enclosed courtyard. And these are varying zones of holiness, right? Hence the reason why it's called the most holy place. Well, the same thing can be said for Mount Sinai. Mount Sinai has boundaries erected at the bottom that neither man or beast can cross, but yet Moses, Aaron, and his two oldest sons, Joshua, Moses' apprentice, and the 70 elders of Israel are invited to come up into the mountain and to eat a meal with God. And then Moses alone gets to go further up into the cloud. Even Aaron doesn't get that unique privilege. And so those are gradated areas of holiness that God is allowing certain people to go into or have access to. So in Genesis 40, when the tabernacle is constructed, everything in its place, God's presence comes from the summit of the mountain into the actual tabernacle. And now Moses and Aaron can't go in. That takes us through the first 7 chapters of Leviticus, when God outlines how people can approach through the various means of sacrificial offerings. And then the time comes in Leviticus 8 for Moses to finally install Aaron as the high priest. And just as God has formed the first high priest outside of the garden temple to put him in, so Moses undergoes the ceremony where Aaron is first washed with water, consecrated with the anointing of oil and blood mixed together. And then when Aaron gets to go in the temple or the tabernacle, he is told to remain there for 7 days. He's not doing anything, but he's just there, abiding in God's presence, like Adam is pictured abiding in God's presence in the garden. And he is there waiting the instructions that God will give with respect to what he can eat, what he can't eat, and what he's supposed to do while he's in the garden, right? So just as God had planted the garden and placed the man he formed there, so Aaron is intentionally installed in the new Garden of Eden. And with that, as Aaron received a commission, we look back on the commission Adam had, and we better understand that when God told him to work it and watch over it, Adam is not a gardener. He is not plowing up new rows of corn or anything like that. This word work is abad in Genesis 2, but it's also abad or abodah. It's just a variant of the word itself from the same 3-letter Hebrew root word, meaning the exact same thing, because it's translated as such in Numbers 18, when God is telling Moses to tell Aaron and the tribe of Levi that they are responsible to do the work inside this portable garden of Eden, we call the tabernacle, because they will be held accountable and have to bear the consequences. What's translated here as watch over it is shamar, but the same word shamar is used here in Numbers 18 to guard the sanctuary, because what happens here again is laid solely on their shoulders. And if anything is blasphemous or out of order, then God will first execute his wrath upon them. And then, of course, all of the nation is vulnerable for that as well. So they are entrusted with the information and entrusted with the duty of making sure everything is executed appropriately. And Adam is as well. God is going to share with him wisdom, the wisdom of knowledge of good and evil. He's not going to invite him yet to eat of that tree, but in time he may. But that is not for Adam to have yet. He must walk with God in wisdom, trusting, right? Then we look at how God caused the tree of both knowledge of good and evil and life to grow in the garden, along with all other trees suitable for food. And then when we look inside the temple, granted, not the tabernacle, but it supplants the tabernacle and uses the same rudimentary architectural design, that it is overlaid with cedar panels that have this garden-esque picture to it. And of course, Adam, he receives the wisdom to be able to name everything. And then, of course, God had skilled certain men, Bezalel and Aholiab, to take the piles worth of precious metals and gems and cloth and whatnot and turn it into everything that God had told Moses needed to be fashioned for the tabernacle. And so, infused with the wisdom of the Spirit, they now know what they're supposed to do. God gave the first high priest a helper and the person made from his rib. God gave an entire tribe over to Aaron exclusively to help and assist him with what he was supposed to be doing. And of course, we have a river that comes from Eden. And then we have the bronze wash basin that is the body of water inside the tabernacle. And granted, it's spoken of as if it's strictly utilitarian in its purpose and intent, but it's not. And Solomon seems to have caught on to this, because when you go to the account of how the temple was designed, then Solomon takes the dimensions of the basin and he enlarges it way more than it what originally was, puts it on the top of four teams of oxen pointing in all four directions. And from those team of oxen, we have water carts that are lined up in sequence after each other, such that when you look down from the top of it, it looks like a stream of water going in all four directions, like rivers washing down the side of a mountain, as the River of Eden was splitting into four rivers washing down a mountainside, right? And notice, and this is the so what behind it, because these rivers are noted to be flowing around different geographic areas, which is to suggest the priestly blessing of Eden that Adam was supposed to carry to the furthest point on the map, if he was obedient to God's command, was eventually someday going to bless the nations that were inhabiting these lands when Moses was writing these accounts down. That even the big bad enemies of Israel, such as Assyria, were those who were meant and destined for Edenic blessing, as everyone was, not just Israel. So that becomes mission one. And that is exactly what the first high priest was supposed to be doing. And as he takes the garden and begins to expand it outwards, and when he fills it with people who share his image as well as God's image, procreated through his marriage with Eve. And then eventually God's glory fills all of this created space. But that sadly isn't what happened. So hopefully that was helpful. And I encourage you to tune in for our next lesson.